Bones, welcome back to 10% True. Good to see you again.
Oh, it's great to see you too, Steve. Here, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say. I will just say to the audience at home, you should be able to figure it out, but this is obviously not the start of a series of Bones. This is actually the third episode. So if you are tuning in now, you haven't watched the first two, go back and watch the first two so that you can catch up with Bones' experience as a Royal Canadian Air Force fighter pilot. For everybody else who has watched Weapon 1 and 2, Bones, unless you wanted to talk about your uniform, what we're going to go straight into is your departure from Coningsby as an F3 exchange pilot flying the Tornado, or exchange pilot flying the F3 Tornado. I will hand it over to you.
Yeah, so thank you very much. First of all, different mug this morning. So this is my 45 squadron. That was the last F-18 squadron I was on. They came up with these beautiful steel mugs, and then they had them engraved. But the steel is so hard that they couldn't really get the engraving in, so you can barely see it. So you have to take my word for it. It is a 45 squadron mug. I like to have different mugs. The uniform, I'll just move back a bit because you probably can't see it. But this is my staff officer uniform, and that's how we're going to sort of start out the discussion today. Is how I transitioned from being an exchange pilot on the Tornado and going into a staff tour. And staff jobs are, I think for all pilots, but especially for fighter pilots, they're particularly dreaded and egregious. But I knew that I didn't have any choice. I'd done 3 long fighter tours. There was no way I was going to go back to another flying job. So I steeled myself for the upcoming trauma. And it actually wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. So, there were some interesting parts to it too. So I was in Coningsby. I'm coming up to the end of my tour. We have an individual called the career manager. So he's the person that slots pilots into different positions. And he just happened to be a good friend of mine. So I called him up from England and I said, "Hey, Louis," I said, "Bones here." I said, which F-18 gun squadron are you going to send me to? And he starts laughing. And he says, "Bones," he says, "your future involves a bay." He says, "Because you're a friend of mine, I'll give you the choice." Because normally they just put you in wherever you're needed, right? So he goes, "You can either go to Goose Bay or to North Bay." So Goose Bay is a very small Canadian detachment there. It's basically a NATO flying training base for low flying for the Brits, Germans, Dutch, and the Italians. But they keep a Canadian staff there as well. And it's way out in the middle of nowhere. And I ended up there after I left the military. I went there for a year. Beautiful place, by the way. But the other thing was North Bay. So when I'd driven out to Cold Lake, this was about 8 years previously, we were driving around North Bay, which is about probably 500 kilometers north of Toronto. And it was a horrible day. It was snowing. We were driving around the ring road, which is all industrial sites. And my brand new wife at the time, she says, "Oh, what a horrible place." And I figured I was going to end up there because that's where our fighter group headquarters was. So I go, no, it's actually beautiful in the summertime, and down by the lake, it's gorgeous. And she goes, "No, I'm never coming here." And I'm going, "Oh no, this is going to be tough." So fast forward 8 years, and now I've got the choice between Goose Bay and North Bay. And I came home to her and I told her what the options were, and she was looking daggers at me because there's no way she was going to go to Goose Bay, and now she had to backtrack on North Bay. So anyway, we ended up in North Bay. I was still a captain, so 2 stripes, like a flight lieutenant at the time, and I had a great job there. It was very much in the meat of the fighter operation. So tactics, weapons. Changes to the aircraft and all that kind of stuff. It was very, very sort of a tactical headquarters job. Backtracking to my time in Coningsby, we were deployed to Gioia del Colle in Italy for the Bosnia conflict. And my boss, who also happened to be my navigator, so this is the flight commander, not the squadron commander, but the flight commander, he was also paired up with me as my navigator, and a great guy, Welsh guy, beautiful, soft, dulcet accent. You could never get him excited even when they're shooting at us. And so he gets this package from the Defense Liaison staff in London that says, yeah, could you write up this performance evaluation report for Captain Ledsham? So he comes to me and he goes, Bones, he says, what the heck is this? It was like 40 pages. I said, oh yeah. I said, it's a nightmare filling those things out. I said, if you want, I'll fill it out and then you can just sign it right. And he goes, oh, okay, sure. So of course I ticked off all the far right boxes, and I was, I was basically the best fighter pilot and best officer material ever. And he actually signed it and sent it in.
That's brilliant.
So our fighter force, well, our whole air force had been downsized, the peace dividend after the Berlin Wall falling and all that kind of stuff. And that was the time where they closed the base in Germany. So we actually had a surplus of fighter pilots, and they were actually sending experienced majors, so senior officers, to go fly the Sea King. That was the only flying job they could find these guys.
Really?
Like it was absolutely atrocious. And that's the only time I've ever seen, before, after, a shortage of pilots. So I knew I was in big trouble, but I had a good staff job, as they go. And I also got what's called a designated flying position. So I was able to fly, as much as I could organize the schedule, because I'd have to go out to one of the fighter bases to fly. So out to Cold Lake or to Bagotville to fly. But I got checked out on the F-18 again, and I was able to do that probably about 1 week every 2 months, maybe. So not a lot, but enough to keep my hand in. And it was a good excuse to get out of headquarters. But of course, all the emails piled up where you're gone. So it just meant more work. But, it kept my sanity, that's for sure. And so anyway, getting back to the performance evaluation report, I was at Fighter Group for a year, and then I get a notice that I'm being promoted. And the job that I was in, it was for a captain, so it wasn't a major. So they had to find me another job. So I went to another job there, and it was called the Staff Officer Joint. So this is joint operations with the Army and the Navy. But it wasn't a designated flying position, so I lost my flying position. And to top it off, when you're in a designated flying position, you actually get flying pay. And if you're not in a designated position, you don't get it. And my boss there, he was a real stickler for rules. So as soon as he got the promotion notice, he sent off a message to our headquarters and said, okay, cancel his flying pay. And if he hadn't said that, nobody would have known. I would have kept on getting it. And that was a big chunk of money. So I ended up actually making maybe $50 a month more as a major than I did as a captain, just because of the loss of flying pay.
Really?
Yeah. So it was a double whammy. I lost my flying and I lost the pay as well. So we have a different hat as a major. You get the scrambled eggs on the brim of the hat. So I went to supply and I bought a new hat, and I think it was about $40 or something. And I came back and I told all the guys in the shop, that I got my hat, and they said, "Oh no, we don't wear those anymore. You don't need that." So even on parade, they didn't wear them. Yeah, so that's like, oh man, I just spent my last $40. Anyway, so it was actually quite an interesting job as the joint guy. I got to deal with the Army and the Navy, and we had liaison officers, who were fighter pilots that worked with the Army and the Navy as well. So I got to go out and visit them, and also work, with their headquarters staff. So it was good, and that really was a great lead-in for my follow-on job after I'd left the military. So when I was working with top aces, they did a lot of work with the Army and the Navy. So it was very good to, not just the down in the weeds stuff that we did with them, but also how headquarters and their organizational structure worked. So it worked out well for me then. So I was going to be there for 3 years at Fighter Group. And after 2 years, my next level up boss, so he was a full colonel, he was announced as the next wing commander for Bagotville, which is the Eastern Fighter Base. So I saw him in the hallway one day, and I said, "Hey," I said, "do you need any experienced major fighter pilots on your wing?" And I just threw it out as a joke because we were actually surplus of fighter pilots at the time. And he knew me. I think he was a student of mine when I was an instructor on the F-18. So we had a great relationship. And he goes, he says, "Let me look into it." And the next day, I get a posting message to one of the TAC fighter squadrons at Bagotville, and that's where my wife was from. So it was perfect for me. You know, so that was just great. You know, I got out of there a year early and posted to 425 Squadron in Bagotville. We go out there in the summer, and I check into the squadron, and I've been assigned as the operations officers for the squadron. So it's a big position, and in USAF squadrons, that's the same rank as a squadron commander. So they're both lieutenant colonels. When I showed up there, I was actually shocked. The squadron was so unbelievably disorganized. It looked like a flying club. And I thought, you know, like, this is a frontline F-18 squadron, and these guys are just lounging around, and it was really shocking. So that was a lot of work, and I had to get back into the tactical side of the F-18 as well. You know, it wasn't just being a supervisor on the squadron, but I had to get back into it because it'd been many years since I hadn't really flown the jet. So one of the first things that came up, we got a message from the headquarters, and it said, okay, you are now the Rapid Reactor Squadron. So we have squadrons on different levels of readiness, depending on what they're going to do. All squadrons had the NORAD air defense role, but we also did the air to surface role and the deployment role. So we could primarily go over to Europe, you know, wherever it took us, including the Gulf and that sort of thing. So the first thing I did was I contacted the headquarters, and I said, okay, what's the plan here? And they said, well, we've got to come up with a plan, you know, so we need a war plan, basically, to say how this is going to come into effect, what kind of support you need, what kind of transport you need, how many people you need, all that kind of stuff. And I said, well, you mean you don't have that? And he goes, no. I mean, the last one we had was from 10 years ago, and it's totally out of date. He said, would you mind coming out to our headquarters in Winnipeg and help us write it? And I'm going, holy cats, like, that's what headquarters is for, is to write the plans, you know? But they had no idea. They had no idea what was going to be involved. So I flew out there with our maintenance officer in the back seat, and we started writing up this plan of how we're going to deploy could be anywhere in the world. And they started going, well, we can't afford that, you know, and we don't have those resources. And I said, well, why did you declare to NATO that, you know, we were going to have a rapid reactor squadron if you can't support it? He goes, well, you know, we'll kind of budget. So we came up with this war plan, which looked great on paper. And then it was about 6 or 8 months later, I get another message saying, okay, you're going to get a NATO TACEVAL. And that's a big deal. I don't know if you're aware of, you know, what's involved, but it's you know, you have to do this right because it reflects on your whole country. So the good news was it was going to be conducted in Andoya in Norway, and I'd been there many times in the F5, so I knew the base and I knew the area. So I thought, okay, well, that's good. You know, I know what I'm dealing with. At least I'm not going to someplace I'd never been before. So I contact the same guys at headquarters, and I said, okay, I said, we're going to need a budget, you know, to do this because it's going to be expensive. And they go, well, no, that's got to come out of your squadron budget. And I said, well, we can't do that because we put in our budget request a year ago, and we didn't know that we were going to deploy to Europe. They said, well, we don't have any money.
Wow.
I said, well, how are we going to do this? You know, like, it was unbelievable. These people had no ideas in the headquarters. So we eventually beat them into submission, and they came up with some money, but there was no support for us. You know, we should have had an airfield defense regiment. You know, we should have had proper military police. We should have had, you know, all of the support things you need to deploy a squadron. And I'd seen it from the RAF, and the RAF does a very good job, you know, when they do these deployments, especially for a TACEVAL. So I knew how it should be done. Well, we scrabbled together and we did a workup, and the TACEVAL team from NATO, they sent some representatives over to Bagotville, and we did some of the preliminary work. So we had to do threat recognition, some written exams, and then they looked at all our paperwork and stuff so that they wouldn't have to do all this stuff in theater. So it made sense that they would come and do this preliminary examination. And the other good thing was that the head of the TACEVAL team was a Tornado F3 navigator who I knew. So I thought, oh, great, I'm in, you know. So a couple of the guys decided to, this was in the winter, and a couple of the guys decided to take him out snowmobiling on the weekend. And doesn't he crash into a tree and he really busted himself up. You know, he broke his hip and punctured a lung and all that kind of stuff. So I'm like, oh no, there it goes. So they found another lead for the TACEVAL team, and we deployed over to Norway. And I was on the advanced party, so I got to go over on the C-130, lovely. And the first transport truck came in with the Airbus 310. That was what we used for the strategic transport at the time. And it was full of duty-free booze. There was nothing, virtually nothing operational, no spare parts for the F-18s or anything. And the TACEVAL team is standing there watching, and they're looking at me, you know, because I'm the OPI for this, and they're going, "Are you here for a party or are you here for a TACEVAL?" And I started dancing, and I go, well, you know, they must have mixed up the load that probably was supposed to go somewhere else and all this kind of stuff. So I call back and I say, what the hell's going on? And I'm talking to the loadmaster back in Bagotville, and he goes, well, he says, we didn't know what the priority was. So the ground crew came and they said, hey, make sure you get all this booze on, because it's, you know, it was about a quarter of the price of what we're paying in Canada. So I said, okay, well, make sure you get the ops box and some spares and all this kind of stuff, and, you know, NBCW gear, you know, so it makes it look like we're actually ready to fight. Oh, sorry, sir, you know, the load's already made up and we can't break it down. And I said, no, you got to do this, you know. And sure enough, the next load shows up and it's all duty free booze as well. So I'm going, oh, no, we've already failed. But anyway, we scrambled, the jets came over, we started flying. We got into the TACEVAL, which is very intense. You know, it's 24-hour ops. And one of our jets was coming back at night, and it was snowing, and there was a big crosswind on the runway. And they don't tend to clear the runways very well in Norway. They put grit down on them, sand, so they can get some kind of friction, but it was still pretty slippery. So and it just so happened it was our 1-2-seater aircraft, and he had one of the NATO TACEVALers in his back seat. So they land on this runway, and the snow is drifting across, and he ends up going off the side of the runway, probably at 120 knots.
Wow.
So he calls eject, and then he goes, no, don't. And because normally the call is eject, eject, eject. And the guy in the back seat should go on the first call, and the guy in the front seat will go on the third call, just in case the separation doesn't work. It's automatic separation, but just in case. So he called the first eject, and he goes, no, stop. And as they went off the side of the runway, the snow was quite soft, and he said it was like driving into a big marshmallow. So they just came to a very quick stop. But the guy in the backseat, who was actually a Hornet pilot from Australia for some bizarre reason, he had actually pulled the handle, but not far enough to initiate the ejection sequence. So he's sitting on this hot seat, not knowing if it's going to go or not. He's trying to get the handle back in, which is difficult to do, you know, when it's partway out.
Wow.
It was just crazy. But they, I think they had to replace the landing gear. And other than that, they got the airplane back flying in 2 days, which was incredible, you know, like incredible work. So I think that might have saved us in the TACEVAL.
just tell us, Bones, about the seat thing then. How did they end up safing that seat so he can get out?
Well, you can push it back in.
You can,
but, you know.
Okay.
Yeah. So he'd only pulled it part way out, so not enough to initiate the sequence.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was his, just returning to I think part one, was his was that runway departure based on the landing technique that you talked about? You know, sort of planting it and then sort of bouncing a little, or was that unrelated to this particular mishap?
It's hard to say. It could have been a variety of things. The big thing is visual illusions. So when there's drifting snow coming across the runway because of the crosswind, it's very, very hard to gauge what your track is down the runway. So I think that was probably what caused it.
Okay.
And maybe some landing technique as well, because the pilot who was flying it had only flown F-18s in Bagotville. So in Bagotville, because it's in a valley, you never get crosswinds there. It's always down the runway.
Okay.
And after that second crash that I was talking about, I said, okay, well, this is ridiculous. The guys need to know how to land in crosswinds because you're not always going to be flying to Bagotville. So there was actually a short runway, a short cross runway in Bagotville, and we would always do, a couple of touch and goes or even a cable arrestment on that short runway, just to make sure guys were comfortable with the crosswind technique. It was stupid that we didn't do that in the past because we'd lost, several airplanes because of that poor crosswind landing technique. So,
Can I ask? And I know you're in the middle of telling the TACEVAL story, and I don't want to derail you from that. But just quickly, because I'm curious, this sort of lack of I don't know what you'd even call it, attentiveness, awareness, appropriateness at headquarters, the fact that the squadron is a bit like a flying club. What is it that's happened within the Royal Canadian Air Force, in particular the fighter aviation part of it, that has contributed to that becoming a thing?
That's a great question. And because I'd been out of country for 3 years, it really came as a shock to me because when I left, I left the training squadron, and we did not only the training of the new pilots, but we also did the fighter weapons instructor course. So we conducted that training, which was very, very high level training. So it really was a shock when I got back to see how the fighter squadrons were operating and the lack of support from the headquarters too. And it was like, come on, guys, this is, we're here to fight. We're not here as a flying club. And it was terrible. Like, it really was awful. I told you the story about the blue flying suits. We show up in theater with blue flying suits, and it's like, come on, guys. So that was a real shocker. And I'll get into a little bit more of that, as I talk about the art of war, for the fighter pilots.
Okay.
So we managed to bluff our way through the TACEVAL. They gave us a bear pass type of thing, but that's fairly common for weak countries and weak air forces. It's very rare that they would fail you unless you did something really egregious. So we got the pass mark and went back to Canada. So now we're blessed as the Rapid Reactor Squadron. We deploy out to Cold Lake for a maple flag exercise, which is like red flag, but the Canadian version. And we're 1 week into that, and the boss gets a message and says, okay, stop the exercise, get back to Bagotville as soon as you can, bring the jets and the pilots, and you're going to deploy over to Italy. So this was the workup for Kosovo. One of the F-18 squadrons from Cold Lake had been there, I think, about 4 or 5 years previously for the Bosnia conflict. They didn't actually drop any bombs or anything. So once again, I'm the OPI for the deployment. I fly over to Aviano, and this time the support was a lot better. So we had a team from the National Defense Headquarters that were there, and we didn't need any airfield defense or any of that kind of stuff. The Americans and the Italians provided all that. So it was purely to support the Canadian F-18s that were there. And they actually did a pretty good job. It was much, much better than the NATO TACEVAL, which is where they should have put the effort, because we came very close to failing the TACEVAL, which would have been a national embarrassment if we had done that. So at least I knew that the support was there. We got everything spun up. The jets came over, and we started doing the flying. Now, I skipped ahead a bit here. So when we were in Maple Flag in Cold Lake, we did a week of that, and those flying exercises are excellent, excellent training. And it's not just the flying, it's all of the planning and the coordination that you do with the other groups. The big difference is on the flag exercises, 90% of it you do face-to-face. So you can coordinate with the other packages that are flying at the same time. You can talk to the support assets, the AWACS and the air refuelers are there as well. So that's a huge advantage to be able to talk to these guys instead of, and we didn't, when we went into combat in Kosovo, we didn't even really talk to people on the phone. It was all done by message traffic, so they just said, hey, you need to be at this place and this time. We would coordinate most of the time with the mission commander. For us, it was the Strike Eagles out of Lake and Heath. They were the mission commanders for the packages that we were doing. the first package that I led out of Aviano, or the portrait of Canadian Hornets that I led, the package commander was a Wizzo, a backseater from the F-15Es, great guy. And we started doing the mission planning, and we had, we all had our targets and our time over target. And then you work backwards along the route that they gave you, and then you get a push point. So this is the time that you leave, and now you're committed to going in. So we had all that. We'd figured out our timing to get from the push point to the target. And the USAF guys were doing all the planning on a mission computer. So it was a laptop, and they were doing all the planning on it. And something went wrong, and they were unable to figure out their push time. So the night is getting late, and we're flying the next night. We weren't flying that night, but we were flying the next night. But we got to get back and get some sleep and do all our preparations too. So I was probably there for an hour and a half, and I'm talking to him. And I'm trying not to pressure him too much, because he was quite stressed out about this, that they're not able to get this mission planning computer working. So I came up with a ruler that we used to use in the F5 days, and it just had the timing marks at 420 knots, 480 knots, and whatever. So I said, hey, just put this on the map, and you'll be able to figure out your time. He goes, holy cats, I've never seen anything like that. And it was just it was a ruler that our Intel guys had made up, with just marks on it that delineated the time. So I said, well, show me your map and I'll do it for you. So he shows me the map, and they were doing 500 knots true for some bizarre reason. So, it didn't really equate, but I said, well, we'll use 480 and we'll just fudge it by a couple of seconds. So I said, okay, well, you just push at this time, and, we'll push 10 minutes after you, type of thing. So he goes, oh, wow. Yeah. So we went out, and we went in the first night, and the weather was great. It was clear and a million, dark. I don't think there was any moon. We didn't have night vision goggles back then. We had the FLIR, so we could see features on the ground. And our target was a missile storage and repair facility in Serbia. It wasn't in Kosovo. It was up in Serbia. And it was on the edge of an airfield, a military airfield. And they were still publishing their ATIS. So we knew what the surface winds were. We knew what the altimeter was and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, there was no OPSEC. Wow. So we knew what the surface winds were. And that's very important for your bombing strategy, because as soon as the first guy dropped, we were coming in trail. So each airplane was a mile and a half, 2 miles behind the preceding aircraft. But if you drop your bombs and the wind is blowing back into you, then the second aircraft won't be able to see the target, because it'll be obscured by the smoke. So we knew the direction of the wind. We planned our attack accordingly. I was the lead aircraft, so I slewed my FLIR to the inertial nav system. So now it's pointing at the area, and you can either zoom in or zoom out with the FLIR. So I looked down, and it was, like I said, it was clear in a million. And what do I see is a great big cloud sitting right over my target. And I thought, how the heck could that be? There's no clouds anywhere. And there's one cloud sitting over my target. So I thought, well, there's nothing I can do about it, because you have to see the target. You can't drop the bombs, on coordinates. As I got closer, I realized that it was a cloud that was sitting over the airfield, and our target was on the far end of the airfield. So after I got sort of a line of sight beyond the cloud, then I could see our target, and I dropped the bombs. Well, I found out later that it was the F-15s that had gone in on the airfield, and we didn't know this, but this was the smoke coming off their explosions. Yeah. So that's another lesson learned about attack planning, is you have to send the guys into the far end of the target area first, not to the close end, because as it turns out, my number 4 was not able to see the target at all. So he carried his bombs back home with him. And I didn't realize that. He didn't tell me that he'd missed the target. So we're flying back out, and there was, I didn't see any surface-to-air missiles. We didn't get lit up by any SAM radars, but there was a lot of AAA fire. And they would fire, I think, probably 1 round out of every 5 or 10 was a tracer. So you could see this stuff coming up at you. It wasn't particularly threatening, but my number 4 he started maneuvering to try and get away from the surface-to-air missile or the surface-to-air, the AAA fire. And he started running low on airspeed because he was stuck at his altitude and he still had all his bombs on board, so he was still heavy. He lit the afterburner to recover his airspeed, and he started screaming on the radio. And I turned around, and he was 10 miles behind me, and I could see his afterburners 10 miles away, and we were about 5 miles above the ground. So when he lit his afterburners, everyone and his brother started shooting at this, this light source because they were just shooting visually. Well, first of all, they would shoot on noise because they didn't want to turn on the radar. So they would hear the airplanes coming. And we, just like in Vietnam, we would fly the same route, same time every night. When, they would light up the AAA. But once he lit up his afterburners, they were really, really shooting at him. So I had to yell at him on the radio to get his attention. I said, "Get out of afterburner," and he pulled it out of afterburner. And then the ground fire faded off after that because they couldn't see him. So we flew back home, and he was pretty shaken up.
Was he a young guy? I mean,
he was fairly young.
That must be one of the rules of that's fighter pilot 101, isn't it? Don't light your burners at night. You don't want to be seen.
Well, and here's another thing: we'd never really done any night attack. So all of the maple flag and red flag, it was always done during the day, and it's a different environment at night. You're flying with your lights out, and you don't realize that. So when you start pulling G on the airplane and it gets slow very quickly, the natural reaction is to throw the afterburners in to recover your speed. And we were at a hard altitude. We had a block probably 20 to 25,000 to deconflict with the other friendlies there. But I said to him afterwards, I said, "Hey, there's a couple of lessons learned here, guys. First of all, when you start maneuvering, hit the jettison button and get rid of the tanks and the weapons. The next thing is, if you start running low on airspeed, use the big sky theory. There's probably nobody else out there. So just take it down. Don't go below 15,000 feet, but you still got 8,000 or 9,000 feet you can use to get your airspeed up." They were so, and this was the system, the system had ingrained into people that you have to maintain your altitude. And when you get slow, you have to hit the afterburner. But they never put all these things together in a wartime scenario. So it was, he came very close that night. And for really dumb reasons. And it wasn't his fault. It was the system that didn't support him, to get to that point. I mean, we were woefully unprepared for all of this, not just technically, but in terms of practice. And we'd never done night attack profiles. We had to do a certain amount of night flying, but we would go up and do intercepts at night, because it's a lot easier.
Why? Why is that then? I mean, because you mentioned maple flag being similar to red flag. The idea behind red flag is you fly your first 10 combat missions, you make all those kind of rookie mistakes, and you do that in the safety of, the training ranges before you go into combat for real. I'm really surprised that you weren't doing ground attack at night, especially as you have. Was it AT Flare that you were using, or I don't know, the target pod?
No, we had the Nighthawk.
The Nighthawk. Okay, so you've got a good target pod.
Yeah, and that was the other problem. So the squadron that had gone over there, I don't know, 5 or 6 years previously, they were the initial ones to get the Nighthawk pod, but we'd only bought a very small amount, maybe 8 pods in total. And then when they came back, they wanted to husband them at the central location. So even though we did our workup as the NATO Rapid Reactor Squadron, we never got to use the Nighthawk pods until they said, "Yeah, you're going over there." And then we had a 1 week workup with these things.
Wow. To
try and figure them out. But it was really to figure out how to guide the laser guided bombs, because that was how you designated the target, was with the FLIR. So we didn't do any 4-ship mass attack scenarios or any of that kind of stuff. It was just the technical part of how to run this target.
You were learning on the job.
Yeah, it was terrible. And we also got Maverick missiles, the imaging infrared missiles, and they're tricky to use. There's a lot of things you can screw up on those things. And we got those a week before we left as well. So we're trying to figure out the FLIR pod, we're trying to figure out the laser guided bombs, and we're trying to figure out the Mavericks. And it's, you could see guys' heads exploding. It was too much to expect from these guys. And I got another great story about that a bit later on when the second squadron came to replace us. But So that was the first night that we went in, and then we would do every other night. So in the intervening nights, we would do the mission planning for the following night. The next trip we did, so the first time you go into these kind of scenarios, you're so busy and you're so focused that your mind doesn't really wander. You know, you're just got the blinders on. I've got a job to do. It's very, very difficult. You don't think about fear. You don't think about anything else. The next night, which is 2 nights later, another beautiful night, clear in a million, and we had to fly from northern Italy all the way down the Adriatic, up through Macedonia and back up into Serbia. For some political reason, we weren't allowed to cut over Bosnia, which seemed crazy. We'd been flying there the whole time, but now we're not allowed to fly over Bosnia. So we had to do this huge route. It was about an hour and a half to get into Serbia. It would have been, 25 minutes if we had gone direct. So we had to refuel on the way down there. As I'm coming up across Macedonia, you could see all the cultural lighting on the ground. You could see all the cars driving around. And then I could see the border with Serbia. And it went from modern day Europe. And this sounds a bit ethereal, but it was like crossing into hell. It was completely black. The only lights were the fires that were burning from combat, and you could see the tracer fire coming up.
Really?
And that really hit me. It's like, yeah, I'm actually stepping into hell right now. Yeah. So that's when things, I started to think, this is not pleasant. It's exhilarating to be in combat, but it is not pleasant. A couple of weeks later, so we had been there for, I think we went in June of 98, and now we're into March of 99. So what's that? Almost 9 months, maybe. So they said, okay, well, we've got to rotate your squadron out. And our squadron had been augmented by the other squadron at Bagotville. But they said, okay, well, you guys need to rotate out. We'll bring the Cold Lake Squadron in. And the squadron commander was a good friend of mine. You've probably heard of him, a guy named Billy Flynn.
Yeah.
So he's quite a famous test pilot, display pilot. He was the head guy on the F-35. Well, he was the squadron commander of the Cold Lake Squadron when they came in to replace us. What they did was they did their initial in-briefing and all that sort of thing. And then we would take 2 of their pilots with us. So there'd be 2 Bagotville pilots and 2 Cold Lake pilots until their leads got up to speed. So that was the number 1 and the number 3. They were the 2 leads in the squadron. And then they could start taking their own formation out. So we did that for a couple of iterations. Some great guys on the Cold Lake Squadron, some old friends of mine. And then I took a couple of the wingmen up flying, not up flying, but on one of the missions into Kosovo. And this was their first bombing mission, so they'd never been in combat. They were fairly inexperienced, and I knew them. And they were both good guys, like sharp operators and well focused and stuff. But I knew that this was going to be very, very difficult for them, and the hardest part was going to be the refueling, because we had to refuel before we went in to hit the target. So I thought, okay, well, I'm gonna brief all of the tactics, how we're gonna get in, how we're gonna get out, the specifics of the attack, going through all the switchology and all that kind of thing. And then I'm going to talk about the air refueling at the end, so it'll be fresh in their mind, because that's the first thing that they're going to have to do. And I said, okay, have you guys refueled off the KC-135? Because the KC-135 for us is the most difficult tanker. And they attach a hose at the end of the boom. It's a very short hose. And you have to hit the basket, and then you have to push the hose up so that it makes a 90-degree bend, and that opens the refueling valve. And it's very, very tricky to do that. So I said, okay, have you guys refueled from the KC-135 before? And they're both like, no. So I'm going, oh, this is going to be tough. Okay. So I said, well, you got to listen to me, because it's not intuitive. You have to do this by rote. There's symbology in the HUD, and you have to line up a certain part of the tanker on the heading bug of the HUD, and just use your peripheral vision to look at the basket. Because if you try and look at the basket, you'll end up chasing it. You'll never get in. So I said, I knew that neither of them had done the KC-135. I said, are you guys, fairly current on night refueling? Have you done it in the last month? So the first guy says, well, I did it about 2 months ago. And the other guy's kind of looking at his boots. And I said, well, how about you, Skippy? And he goes, I've never done night refueling before. So he's doing his first combat mission. He's doing it on an airplane that's the most difficult to refuel off. And he's doing it in. Right. So I didn't say anything, but I'm thinking, there ain't hope in hell. This is just not going to work. So we get up to the tanker, and the two leads, myself and the other guy from Bagotville, we took our fuel first because I knew it was going to take a while for these guys to get their fuel. And the first guy, it took him a long time. He was what we call jousting with the basket. So what happens is, as your probe is coming up towards the basket, the bow wave off the nose of the airplane actually pushes the basket outboard. So you tend to chase it, but at a certain point, the basket won't go any further. So then it starts coming back. So you end up doing this, and that's called jousting with the basket. So he did that for quite a while, but he finally got in. It's like, bravo, you got in. That is incredible. Just that in itself was a huge victory. And then the second guy, he was doing the same thing, but he was the guy that had never done the night refueling, so he was really struggling. And at a certain point, I said, I hate to tell you this, but we got to go. We have a time on target, and we're burning fuel. We're waiting for you to take fuel too. So we had to send him back home with his bombs, and it was totally not his fault. He was just, they had not prepared him for this job. So that was another big failing in the system. Another interesting story. And this was a two-ship for some reason. I was with the Dutch exchange officer, who was a great guy. And we're flying up. Our target was a radar site in Kosovo this time, in northwest Kosovo. So we're flying up over Kosovo, and it was completely undercast. So I don't know what the ceiling was. It was fairly low cloud, but it was a solid undercast. You couldn't see anything on the ground. And you have to see the target in order to drop the bomb. So I'm thinking, okay, well, we're just, we'll go for a tour and we'll look around, see what we can see, but we're not going to get our bombs off. So as I'm flying up, the capital is called Pristina. As we're flying up, we were a little bit, probably about 20 miles east of Pristina. And I look down and I see this long string of bombs over Pristina. So it was a heavy bomber, either a B-1 or a B-52. And they didn't tell us what those guys did. That was the sort of secret American package, those guys. So it's like, okay, well, I know what that is. That's a heavy bomber because they laid a string of bombs, probably 50 or 60 bombs. And I think it was on the airfield in Pristina. They bombed the target. And the heading crossing angle was about 135. So we're going northwest, and they're probably going a little bit straight east type of thing. So not 90 degrees, but they were heading a little bit away from us, just from the track of the bombs. So I keep motoring on up north, and then something catches my eye, and I look down, and the F-15. So I think they had the Pratt & Whitney engines on the F-15 back then, but it had very distinctive afterburner. And I look down, and I see these 4 afterburners, and I thought, what the hell are the F-15 guys doing flying in close formation at night in afterburner? Well, then I realized it was the B-1. So this B-1 was in full afterburner, and he was quite a bit below us. I think we were at 23,000, so he was probably down at 17 or 18,000 feet in full afterburner, and he was going the speed of heat. Like, we were doing 0.9 Mach, and he was passing us like we were standing still. So what the hell? Well, then the common frequency starts getting very busy on the radio. We were on the AWACS frequency, and you could hear this guy screaming, and he's going, "We're Spike 6, we're running for our lives," type of thing. And it's like, holy cats. Well, sure enough, the Serbs shot a SAM at him. But fortunately, it was in the rear aspect. It wasn't a forward aspect SAM. And the SAM just couldn't catch him. It ran out of juice. But it was quite spectacular to have this God's eye view of what was going on and all the yelling on the radio and stuff. Anyway, the SAM ends up fizzling out and crashes back to Earth, and there were no other shots. So I called them up on the radio and I said, "Hey, listen, your 6 is clear. You can come out of burner." and he wasn't listening. I think they went supersonic all the way back to the UK. Probably broke a few windows on the way back too. Years later, I'm reading in the USAF magazine about this crew, and they had taken off from Lakenheath, and they knew that their ECM gear was broken on the ground. So they had the warning saying that your ECM gear. So they talked to the command post, and the command post said, "Well, it's your choice. You know, if you want to go, you can go." And this crew decided to go, and sure enough, what happens? They get lit up by a radar SAM. You know, so they were very lucky. If it had been a forward shot, you know, coming up at them, they would have been dead.
Yeah.
The only reason that they survived was the speed that they were going, and it was a rear aspect shot.
Wow. Was it a manpad or a radar SAM? You said it was a radar SAM.
It was a radar. Yeah, they were spiked. Yeah. I don't know which SAM it was, but yeah, they were calling Spike 6, and that's the direction that the SAM came up at them. So,
wow.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah.
But Bones, can I take you back and ask you some questions about those the couple of the stories? So the first thing was, I wondered if you could just give us a timeline for your targeting process and how you did it in the Hornet. So you talked about, you know, queuing the pod to an INS, lat long in the INS. Were you using the radar? What were you dropping? You know, what was the actual process for you targeting in? It's an A model Hornet, right? With the APG 70, is it 60? 68 or no, 60, no, 60, don't know.
Yeah, 60 something,
65 or something like that. Someone
67 maybe.
So what was your targeting process in the Hornet like, and what were you dropping?
So at the time we were dropping 500-pound laser guided bombs. We've subsequently found out that they weren't actually doing anything, so we got the 2,000 pounders. But when I was dropping them, they were all 500 pounders. As we flew in, we would try and update the INS because we had a single INS, and it wasn't bad, but it wasn't great. And we were, you know, because we had to do the air refueling, it was a long time before we got to the target. So the technical specs were 1 nautical mile per hour of drift, and if it drifted 1 nautical mile, there's a good chance you weren't going to see the target. So we would do an INS update on the way in, which proved to be more detrimental than favorable for us. And I'll tell you about that in a minute. So we would find a feature on the ground that we could pick out with the ground mapping radar, and we could update the INS based off the ground mapping radar. And then that would hopefully get the INS back to where it should be for the target. As we're approaching the target, if the target was not readily obvious, so if it was, you know, if there were not big features that would really lead you to the target, we would do an offset. So we would pick a point, and then you would have a distance and heading from that point to the target. And that way you could slew the FLIR onto the target as closely as possible, and then start narrowing down your FLIR vision. So the first night it was a bridge, I think, that was probably 4 or 5 miles away from the target. And then you add the offset to that, and then that slews the FLIR over to the target area. And then once you get the FLIR on the target area, you could narrow down zoom in on the target and pick out your what's called a DMPI, which is the designated mean point of impact. So this is where you want the bomb to go, and it'll go through a window, you know, if everything works properly. It's a very, very accurate system. So you would find the offset aim point with the FLIR. You would add the offset data, zoom in on the target, pick the specific area of the target that you want to hit. You would do all that with the cursor on the throttle, so that the cursor would steer a little cross symbol to the actual point. And then the computer in the airplane, the weapons computer, would figure out the launch envelope for the bomb. So then you would follow the steering cues for the bomb, and it was a line that went up the HUD, and as the release cue came down, you just had to press. It was really a consent button, and as the release cue came through the release point, then the bomb would drop off on its own. And the bombs were fairly tricky. Like, you really had to get them off on the right point, because if you dropped it too early, they would guide on the laser, but they would run out of energy and hit short. And if you dropped it too far, they may not be able to curve over enough to pick up the reflected laser energy and pick up the bomb. So you had to, even though it was a laser guided bomb that flew and was guided, you had to be fairly disciplined about the drop point. And then I don't know if you're aware of it, but the laser guided bombs, they don't follow the laser from the aircraft. So the laser shoots at your aim point, and then the laser energy splashes back up from reflections, and the bomb follows the reflected laser energy. It doesn't follow your laser.
Yeah.
And the lasers are very powerful. So even at 25,000 feet, we had to wear a laser visor because of the reflected energy coming back from the ground.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. And especially if there's glass or shiny steel or something like that, that's a very good reflector. It can actually damage your eyes.
You also mentioned IR Maverick and the complexities or the difficulties in using that. Based on videos I've seen, it has a pretty short range. What were you intending to do with IR Maverick?
I think for us, it was probably going to be, if there was a hardened target that the 500-pounder wouldn't take out, or maybe even a tank, that we absolutely had to hit. But we flew with them in training, but we never loaded them up for wartime. That would be the loadout that was decided by the headquarters. Okay. So we never actually flew with them in combat, and it was a good thing too. I mean, it was, if you flew with them a lot, it was fine. It's like anything, right? It's a matter of getting the switches in the right positions and getting the warhead looking at the right, or the seeker looking at the right point and all that kind of stuff. But, I think we flew one training sortie with them, and it was like, wow, I hope I don't have to use this in war. Because it was much trickier than using the laser guided bombs. And they were very expensive too. I can't remember what they cost. It was like $600,000 a piece. The laser guided bomb is probably $40,000-$50,000.
Wow.
So it was a stupid weapon.
Can you tell us a bit more as well about how you felt about the ATO? So I've had on the channel, Star Baby Petruka, who was in the mission planning cell. I can't remember where it was. It wasn't. I don't know where it was. It wasn't down. It wasn't Aviana. It was somewhere else. And he talked a little bit about some of the frustration. So there was a US only ATO, but I think even within that world, there was then a B2 and an F-117 ATO, and he recalled being told you're not allowed to see this ATO, and he's like, well, what are you talking about? We're all on the same team. Why can't I see it? And anyway, he expressed some frustration about the ridiculous nature of that compartmentalization. So you're sort of then, in effect, sort of two steps removed from the center of that targeting process, the ATO process. How did you feel about that? Do you feel any frustration not knowing what the B-52s, the B-1s, the B-2s, the F-117s were doing? Was it okay for you that you actually didn't have a need to know? What was your feeling around it and your sort of logical explanation for
it? Yeah, and I brought up 2 points. The first one was that I didn't know what the F-15Es were dropping on the same airfield that I was attacking, so that would have been nice to know. And if it had been at Maple Flag, we would have known, so we would have had a big map with all of the targets and say, okay, these guys are coming from here, these guys are coming in from here, this is the timing, and we'd be able to see all the deconfliction and stuff, but we just didn't know that they were going to be there. So that came as a big surprise. And then the next one, I talked about the B-1. I had no idea that they were out there, but it was obvious when I saw the bomb trail that that's who it was. But that didn't really affect us other than the surprise factor. Knowing what they were doing, not really a big deal. We trusted that they would deconflict us. So that's the worst thing, is if you end up in the same piece of sky at the same time. When the big sky theory fails, then you can get a collision. That would not be good. So in the big picture, no, it didn't really bother me. But that's a great segue into another issue. So I was there for the first, I was only there for about 2 weeks of the Kosovo conflict because we'd been there so long, and then they rotated us out. By the end of the 2 weeks, you could tell that they were running out of military specific targets. So we started attacking other things. And that's when you get into the sort of mission creep. Is this really what we're supposed to be doing? So we'd hit all of the barracks, we'd hit the missile storage facilities, we'd hit the airfields, and they would show us the battle damage assessment, so we knew whether it had been neutralized or not. And then after 2 weeks, we started running short on targets. And our detachment commander, he was also the base commander or the wing commander from Bagotville. So he was our base commander, but he was running the Canadian detachment from Vicenza, which is where the tactical headquarters was for the conflict. And he was a great guy, actually, a guy named Dwight Davies. Snow Davies, he did an F-16 exchange tour with the USAF down in Mount Luke, I think it was. He and I had flown F-5s together back in the early days, and then he'd gone off and done his thing, and I'd gone off and done my thing, but we'd come back together at Bagotville. So he was the wing commander. Now he is the boss in Vicenza at the headquarters. And he'd been out hiking the weekend before the war started. He'd been up in the mountains, and didn't he break his ankle? And he's about, I don't know, kilometers away from his car, and his car is a standard stick shift car. And it was his left ankle that he broke. So he's trying to figure out how he's going to get the clutch in and out and everything else. And of course, he's in huge pain, right? So he got that fixed up. And when the bombing started, he would drive from Vicenza to Aviano, which I think was probably about 2 hours. And he would come out and see the jets off when they left, and he would wait around until they came back. And it was usually 3 or 4 hours later because they were long missions. So he would do this every night, and then he would go back to Vicenza as soon as that was done and do his job as the detachment commander in Vicenza, because he was pretty busy doing that too. That lasted for about a week, and then he said, "Oh, I can't do this anymore." But it was, that was a huge thing for us to see, that he would make that kind of effort with a broken ankle too. He's on crutches, and he would come out and see his boys, and he would be there when we came back. It's like, wow, that's leadership, So the other thing that he did was, when we started this mission creep with the targets that weren't particularly militarily significant, he would put his foot down. He would say, "No, we're not gonna attack that," because the headquarters, the NATO would assign targets to different squadrons, and he would say, "No, we're not going to do that." So one of them, I think, was a civilian TV station, and they said it's spreading propaganda, so we need to bomb it. And he goes, "No, we're not going to do it." So that took a lot of guts, for a colonel to stand up to some general at NATO and say, "That's not us." And as it turns out, I think the Canadians were there. So the campaign started in March, I believe, and I think the Canadians were there until June. So there were still several months, and they ended up, bombing all kinds of bridges and roads and that kind of stuff too. So I'm glad that I missed that, because in retrospect, I look back on it, and that whole conflict was very complex politically. Because I'd flown over Bosnia and I'd seen the devastation of the villages in Bosnia, I went in there with a clear conscience, so I thought the same thing's going to happen in Kosovo. They're going to basically do ethnic cleansing, get rid of the Muslim people in Kosovo, bring the Serbs back in. But it was far more complex than that. And I didn't have time to dig into the politics of it at the time, but at least I knew that the targets that I attacked were military significant targets. So I'm sorry, I didn't finish off the story about the B-1. So we're flying northwest through Kosovo. The B-1 passes us like we're standing still, going supersonic all the way back to Lakenheath, and we're flying up towards the target. And I'm just on a joyride at this point because it's solid undercast. There isn't a single break in the clouds. And my wingman, the Dutch guy, he calls up and he goes, "Hey, Bones, our target is sticking up through the clouds." And I went, "What?" So I slewed my FLIR over, and sure enough, you could see it. It's like, holy cats, I got to do my job now. I'm just kind of looking around going, "Hey, who else is going to get shot at today?" So it's like, okay, back to work. So sure enough, it was a radar site that was sitting on top of a hill, which is where they put radar sites. So the clouds were so low that they were actually beneath the top of of this hill, and we could see the target. So we dropped our bombs on this radar site and came back home. And the next morning, I had to go to the wing debrief. So this is all the fighter squadrons in Aviano. They would send one rep each, and we would talk about what happened the previous night. So the colonel gets up and he goes, yeah, he says the weather was really tough. He said, but, we got the Canadian rep here and they were the only people actually hit their target last night. So he had the actual HUD film or the FLIR video from my attack.
That's very cool.
So we were stars for about 10 seconds. But he didn't talk about the B1s though. And I didn't say anything about it. But, the B1s had hit their target, but that they would just drop them on radar. They didn't have to see the target to drop. So. So it was a weird situation.
So the constraint for you then not being able to drop on coordinates was that the quality of your coordinates was not good enough. Is that it, rather than you had some ROE around, something else?
So the coordinates were generally quite good. So we would back up the coordinates were probably derived from satellite pictures, and then we would back that up by plotting the target on a map and then double checking the coordinates between the satellite and the map. So we were fairly confident that the coordinates were good, but we didn't have the JDAM then. So we didn't have GPS guided bombs. It was purely laser guided, and you had to see the target to laze the target. Yeah. And I don't think the laser would really penetrate through cloud. I think you had to have line of sight the target.
Is it a silly question to ask whether or not you then had so presumably you didn't have a backup plan, but is it feasible that you would employ an LGB in an unguided mode though? So let's say you had a high priority target, you can't see it. Yeah. Would you have considered dropping it as a dumb bomb?
Yeah. So it's the parameters were built into the mission computer, to the weapons computer, just like a dumb bomb was. So it would be as accurate as a dumb bomb. Now, normally when you're dropping a dumb bomb, you're doing that visually. So you're using what's called CCIP, the continuously computed impact point. So you'd be able to see the target, and that was fairly accurate. You get it within 100 feet. If you're in an overcast situation and you can't laze it, then you would have to use the coordinates, and it could be off by 1,000 feet easily. So,
are you using the radar at all for any kind of mapping?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So how good was it?
The F-18 radar was good. The ground mapping radar was good. If you had terrain, and especially lakes, the lakes would really stand out. Terrain was tough because there's shadows and that sort of thing. But lakes and rivers, highways, railways to some extent, they would stand out. So we would use the radar to get into the local area, and then you would switch to the FLIR because it didn't have as long a view, and then you would tighten things up with the FLIR, and that was your final targeting method.
What did you know about so you're taking out radar sites, you're hitting airfields. What did you know about the Serb defenses then, in terms of their competencies, in terms of how good their equipment was? There's law now that I think LORE that surrounds the Serbs because they shot down an F-117, and as I understand it, they were pretty inventive in the way they did that. It's
a great story. I don't know if you've read the whole story. You can find it on the internet, but it's fascinating how they did it.
Did you know that
we didn't know
sort of ingenuity? Did you know that they were up to that kind of stuff?
No, and it was a real shock when the 117 got shot down, because we thought those things were invincible or invisible, actually, the radar. As that's a great segue. So one of the issues we had, the SA-6 uses a continuous wave illuminator, and continuous wave is exceedingly hard to jam. So the pulsed radars, you can jam them by introducing a sort of a decoy into the electronic and pull it off. But continuous, because it's just a continuous beam, it's very, very hard to jam it. Now, we actually had a jammer on our Hornets, and I don't think the U.S. Navy even had them. And it was a continuous wave jammer, specifically for the Central European theater. And I think it was the ALQ-162. So it was optimized for CW jammers, and then we had the 126B, which is what the Navy had, and that was for the pulsed radars. I found out subsequently, or maybe it was about halfway through, that the 162, the continuous wave jammer, was optimized for low-level operations because that's what we thought we were going to do in Central Europe. So the beam was out like this. It wasn't like this. It was like this.
Mm-hmm.
So you could get into a situation where it would be initially jamming the radar, or maybe not if they hadn't shot at you. But you got to a certain point at high altitude where they could shoot and get underneath the jamming beam and come up underneath you. So that was another bit of a shocker, and of course the Boffins at headquarters knew this, but they didn't bother telling us, or they were instructed not to tell us. I don't know.
Really?
Yeah.
So how did you find out?
Well, after a while, maybe we were just kind of talking around the bar about the 162, and I'd done a project on the 162 when I was going through the fighter weapons course, so I was fairly up to speed on it, but it just never crossed my mind that their jamming beam goes out like that, not like this. So, then it goes, hey, yeah, at high altitude, you're very vulnerable for this thing. While we're talking about equipment, the other big lacking we had is we didn't have the jam-proof radios. We didn't have I think they're FWIC radios. We didn't have those in the Hornet at the time. So we were on an open frequency, and the rest of our attack package had to be on the open frequency because you had to be able to speak to everybody. So that dragged down the other people in the package because we were probably maybe the Spanish didn't have it either, but everybody else, the Europeans and the Americans, they all had the FWIC radio, and you would sync up the radios usually on the ground if you were all on the same base, or through the AWACS, you would get a Mickey that would synchronize the frequency hopping for it. So that was a big thing for us, along with several other things. The Maverick FLIR pod was not great either. The picture we got out of it was horrible. One night I was showing the F-16 guys my FLIR tape, of the target. And he goes, yeah, he says, ours looks great, but they take the video in the F-16 directly from the FLIR pod. It doesn't come through the screen in the cockpit. We had an over-the-shoulder camera that took a picture of the screen, and he says, yeah, he says, our FLIR pod is not much better than yours, actually. It's tricky to use it. And he says, it looks great on the video because it's a direct feed from the targeting pod. I think they were using the Lantern at the time. We subsequently got the sniper pod on the F-18, which is a lot better.
And you had no, I don't know if you said this to me when we were recording or not, you had no IFF, is that correct? No mode 4.
Yeah, we didn't have the interrogator. So we could squawk mode 4 and 1, 2, 3, but we didn't have the interrogator to see where everybody else was. Yeah. So I think we spoke about that. That's the 4 blades in front of the windscreen there on the nose.
So how were you going to, you're attacking airfields? The Yugoslav Air Force has MiG-29s, they've got a real capability. How were you intending to be able to interrogate, defend yourself, let's say, not even on a sort of offensive counter-air?
Yeah, the IFF, they wouldn't be squawking that anyway. So it was, and we wouldn't squawk. We would turn off our IFF as we're crossing the Marshall Point to go into hostile territory. So we wouldn't be squawking until we came back out again.
Even mode 4?
No, because you're emitting, so they could track your emissions. So for combat, it wasn't useful. But for marshalling and for egress, or if we got vectored back on an aircraft that wasn't squawking as he's coming back out, then we would be able to find him if he did turn his squawk back on and it was a friendly squawk. So you'd say, he's friendly, give up. Yeah. So that was very, the IFF was a very, very small part of the threat matrix. And even the Nectar, the non-cooperative target recognition. So we would be able to get an identification of the type of aircraft from the radar, but you couldn't use that solely to declare them as hostile and shoot them. And I think the F-15 guys were probably talking about that too. So that's really tough because you're getting spiked. It says, hey, a MiG-29 spiking you, and the radar saying it's a MiG-29, but I don't have the hostile declaration from the AWACS. So technically, I can't shoot them. So the best thing is just not to even ask the AWACS. Just go, hey, I'm being threatened, self-defense. Boom. It was the only way because it was ridiculous.
Yeah.
They did it on purpose. I mean, we had a couple of blue-on-blue engagements in the Gulf War. We had a couple of Canadian Hornets, and I might have told you the story, but a couple of Canadian Hornets that got vectored on somebody who was coming out of Iraq, and he wasn't squawking, and the AWAC said, "Yeah, he's hostile, shoot him." And they got the nectar and saying it was an A6, so they come up and did the intercept on him and turned on the ID light. Sure enough, it was a U.S. Navy A6. So these things happen.
Yeah.
The God's eye view from AWACS is not always perfect.
So how did you feel then about your performance overall? I get the feeling that this is kind of, it must have been a bit of an unsettling time to see the Royal Canadian Air Force maybe not at its most performant, maybe not, sort of showering itself in glory and perhaps needing, I mean, I don't mean any disrespect, but I'm just getting the feeling from you that it, I mean, all air forces, all organizations, go through change, and sometimes they're at the top of the game, sometimes they're not. So it's not a matter of shame, but I'm just curious to know how you felt about it. Were you in a position to influence? It sounds like you've got a couple of mates who are in senior leadership positions at that time in the Air Force, squadron commanders, wing commanders, that kind of thing. Are they seeing the same thing as you and feeling the same thing as you? Are they able to influence?
Yeah, and it was a bit like I was talking about with the RAF. It's pretty easy to influence the lower levels, but to get something changed, which really needs to be changed, it's much, much more difficult. So up to about the colonel, the wing commander level, they would get it. They would understand. But then to take it to headquarters and say, hey, we need this, this, and this, and they go, well, the Army wants tanks and the Navy wants ships, so we'll put it on the list. And it's like, no, if you want to send us into combat, we need that. And eventually they did. The today's CF-18s are very, very good electronically. They've got all the kit they need, but they're 40-year-old airframes, so it's no good having the best radar in the world if you can't get it up flying. And we're not going to get the F-35 until, I think, 2026. So it's going to be a few more years, yeah. And they'll come in drips and drabs.
Yeah, I was going to say.
So the Hornets are going to be flying for many, many years, yeah.
Over the course of the last three interviews, we've talked a little bit about mishaps, aircraft going off runways. You talked in the very first one about losing friends in aircraft accidents and, hitting lakes and some of the visual deceptions that you have to deal with flying out over the snow. And you've talked about the drifting snow across the runway. Just to tell us a little bit about your experiences with, your near-death experiences, the things that have maybe frightened you or given you pause for thought in your career at flying fighters.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't realize that the vast majority of fighter pilots, ever since World War One, when they really started using airplanes as combatants, the vast majority of deaths have been from training accidents, not from actual combat. So our training was very aggressive. We initially did ultra low level flying, and it only takes a second or two of inattention and you're in the in the trees or in the lake. So we trained very hard to be cognizant of that, but it doesn't take much. So that was probably the majority of our accidents. The other ones that came about were G, loss of consciousness. So even though we flew with the G suit, that gave you about 1 extra G. And if you're not ready and you pull on the stick and you get up to 7G, even with the G suit, you can black yourself out very, very quickly. Air-to-air collisions, that happened a few times, and that was one of my near-death experiences. But I'll talk about the first one. So I was flying an F5 at the time. We were going to go down to the Army range and drop a bunch of practice bombs, shoot some rockets, and shoot the gun. But the weather was too low, so we couldn't get down to the Army range. We couldn't drop our ordnance. So the lead that I was flying with, he said, okay, just go up into the air weapons range in Cold Lake, find a target, on your own and just get rid of all your ordnance, because the armorers hated downloading ordnance when you came back. It was real pain. So they appreciated if we could get rid of everything before we came back. So I found a target on the range. The weather was suitable to do it, but it wasn't great. So the ceiling was quite low, but I had enough to get a bit of a dive angle towards the target. So I dropped my bombs and shot my rockets, and that was all good. And then I started strafing with the gun. And the F5 had 2 cannons. They were revolvers, so it had 6 revolving magazine, but single barrels, like an old pistol. So the rate of fire was probably a third of what the current guns are, the Vulcan cannons. So it took a while to shoot out all the bullets. So I did one pass and I still had some bullets left. So I came around again for the second pass, and I'm shooting and it's still shooting. And now I'm getting close to the target. I think, well, they got to be gone here soon. And just as the last round went out, I realized that the target was on top of a hill. I hadn't even realized that in the past. Wow. And now I'm way too close and way too low. So I buried the stick, and I wouldn't have had time. If I'd hit the hill, I wouldn't have had time to pull the handle. It was that close. And then you go, oh, that was not good. And this is a typical visual illusion, especially in low light conditions. You can't tell the terrain. So I hadn't realized that this target was actually on a hill. I thought it was a flat feature. I mean, it was probably a 100-foot hill, so it was way too low in the first place. But when you do press in on the target, these are the kind of things that can happen. And then the other one, we were on a DACT dev with the Hornets, and this was when I was on the training squadron. And we were fighting against A4s from the US Navy. And I think it was a 4v4. There was a fair number of airplanes in the air, but they wanted to get into a visual engagement because they didn't have radar missiles. So the idea was we were going to do this, radar engagement, get into visual fights, and then mix it up. And the A4s that the Navy had were fantastic. Like they would turn with a Hornet. They were stripped down. They had the big engine. They took out all the gun and the avionics, so it was a little hot rod. So I was actually, I just went up for a backseat ride with one of the other instructors, and he was not particularly sharp, but he had lots of experience on the Hornet and that kind of stuff. So we're going into the merge with the A4s, and I pick out from the back seat a single A4 that's coming towards us. So I call it out to the guy in the front, and I said, "Hey, have you got the A4 at 1130?" And he goes, "Yeah, I got him." And all the while, when a target doesn't move in the canopy, that means, and it's coming from a different angle, that means you're on a collision course, right? So he wasn't moving in the canopy, he was just getting bigger. So I was just about to yell out, watch out. And the A4 went full belly up to us in this huge evasive maneuver, when he realized that we weren't going to miss him. And we should miss the A4. We've got the radar and all that kind of stuff. He's just looking out the window. And that was another time where I wouldn't have had time to, it happened so quickly that I wouldn't have had time to pull my handle. Yeah. Thankfully, the A4 pilot made the miss happen. So we got down on the ground, and I said, you told me that you got him. And he goes, no, I saw another airplane that was out there. It's like, well, how could you miss this, this A4 that was now 3 miles away from us? But he was fixated on the other airplane, which he thought I was talking about. So little things like that, little lack of communication and target fixation. Once again, it can be deadly in a heartbeat.
Does it take a lot of self-discipline not to ruminate on those things, not to replay them in your mind? And what is the impact if you can't do that?
Yeah, and that gets back to the self-defense mechanism. So especially when you do something that's your fault, you don't want to talk about it, first of all. And then secondly, you say, well, I'll never do that again. But there'll always be something else. Yeah. So we don't ruminate on it. Guys think about it, but you wouldn't be able to do your job if you got wrapped around those kind of details. So I survived that one, and I'm now down to 7 lives out of 9. Carry on, old chap.
On a serious note, then, around the losses of friends, I've asked this question a few times of different guests, and hopefully it's not too repetitive for the audience if I ask you the same sort of question. But you sort of do you adopt a sort of religious mentality towards the loss of friends? Do you think, well, I'll see them again at the great big bar in the sky? Do you personally have a view that death is final and there's nothing afterwards, and it just is what it is? How do you emotionally, spiritually, psychologically deal with the fact that you're flying with somebody one day and the next day he's gone?
Pretty deep question, Steve.
It is. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It is a deep question, but you don't have to answer it.
No. I'm kidding you here. I didn't really, I was brought up as an Anglican. Didn't go to church that much. After my parents said that you don't have to go to church, so I didn't choose to go to church. In the military, once my children were born, then we regularly went to Catholic mass, and the military chaplains were fantastic. They were well-grounded individuals. They knew that it wasn't just about preaching, that they had to reach out to people. But these things I didn't really think too deeply about at the time, because you're just so busy doing everything else. So no, we didn't ruminate about that. We just said, hey, I dodged a bullet, and carry on, because I got a full day tomorrow. And then it's, when you get older and you have more time to think about it, and you go, there are some things that we did that was really, really stupid. And that's really what it came down to, and whether it's the pilot that did it, or whether it was headquarters that said, you've got to do it, or whether it was us for saying, no, I'm not going to do it. You're asking me to do something that's really dumb. So I guess that's the sort of trifecta of what was going through our minds at the time. Does that answer your question, or is that too ethereal an answer?
No, that's as I always say to my guests, the answer is the answer. So I'm grateful for I'm grateful for the answer, even if it's a different answer to the one that I was thinking I might get or whatever. So that is the answer.
Yeah. So I was doing the fighter weapons instructor course in 1985, and I was doing that on the F5 before I went on the F-18. The first operational F-18 squadron had been stood up in Cold Lake, and they were to be the NORAD Air Defense Squadron. And then, due to politics, they decided to send that squadron over to Germany to be a ground attack squadron instead. So they had this whole plan that they were going to, replace the air defense squadrons first, and then replace the F-104s over in Germany to do the ground attack role. But the politicians got involved, and they said, no, we're going to send this squadron to Germany. So these guys did a more focused ground attack workup for Germany, and then they deployed the squadron over to Germany. So the first, I don't know why they did it. The first launch out of Cold Lake was 3 aircraft, and it was the squadron commander leading, and then 2 good friends of mine were on his wing. So they were taking off in what we call a VIC formation, a 3 aircraft formation takeoff. And I was down the other end of the runway, the ramp where we operated from. But I knew that they were leaving that day. So I heard the Hornets, and I thought, oh, that's probably my buddies, So they come roaring down the runway. And the runway, I think, is 11,000 feet in Cold Lake. It's a very long runway. So they came roaring down the runway, and I'm going, holy cats, they're halfway down the runway, and they're not airborne yet. But they were heavy. They had 3 fuel tanks and missiles loaded up on board. And then finally, the 2 wingmen just pop up in the air like that. Like, they didn't do a gradual rotation. They went like this. And the lead aircraft stayed on the runway. So I thought, okay, well, he's still got a couple of thousand feet before he hits the cable. And I could see that his hook came down. So that was going to grab the departure and cable. Well, he went zinging right over the cable and off into the overrun. And he was still doing over 200 knots when he went off into the overrun.
Wow.
So I'm thinking, holy cats, well, now he's got to eject, because, the airplane's not going to survive this. But he went so far off the end of the runway, he went behind a set of trees. And then I saw the explosion and the smoke. So I thought, he hasn't even got out. He's been trapped in the airplane, and it's exploded. So I pulled off my parachute. We had a parachute on our backs on the F5. I pulled off my parachute, and I started running out towards towards this crash scene, because there was nobody around. And eventually the fire trucks caught up with me, and they said, hey, are you the pilot? And I said, no, I don't think he got out. I didn't see a chute or anything. So they blasted off ahead to the crash scene, and then I came around the corner, and the pilot's standing there watching his airplane burn. So he did eventually eject, and he must have gone half a mile off the end of the runway before he ejected.
Wow.
But it was nice and flat, So initially, you thought, "Oh, I'll stay with it," and then there was a rut that came up that he said, "No, I'm not going to make that one," and that's what uh, tore apart the airplane.
What was the cause then?
Well, he'd either hadn't. No, he'd set the trim in the wrong direction. So instead of we would take off with 4 degrees nose up trim, and he'd set it either full down or 4 degrees nose down. And he had full aft stick, and the airplane was actually a 200 knot wheelbarrow. There was so much downforce on the airplane that the mains had almost come off the runway, and that's why he didn't catch the cable, because the hook did not reach down far enough to grab the cable.
Wow.
It was going down the runway like this. And then the nose wheels actually left skid marks just from the pressure on them on the runway.
Wow.
Like, why they didn't burst the nose tires, I have no idea. So he was very, very lucky.
I thought if you didn't have the trim set right in the Hornet, you get like a deedle, and the FCS page shows a fault or something. If you advance the throttles with the trim set wrong.
Maybe now. But and then, in typical fashion, they overreacted to it. So first of all, they said, okay, we're going to set, instead of 4 degrees nose up, which is the standard for the Hornet, we're going to set 12 degrees nose up, because you cannot get 12 degrees nose down. So if you screw up the arrows up and down, you just can't get to 12. And then they painted lines on the side of the aircraft, and the ground crew had to check that your stabs were set for trim.
Wow. Okay.
But 12 degrees nose up trim was way too much. So if you're doing a formation takeoff, and you're rolling down the runway, and as a wingman, if you start lagging behind, but you're in full power, you're going to get behind him, and that's not good, because then you can get into his jet wash and stuff. So typically, you just call for power, and the lead would pull his power back a tad, and then you'd catch up. But it was kind of embarrassing, it could be because you were late getting the throttles up or whatever. So then we found out that you just push the stick forward, and you dump all of that drag from these great big sticks, because they're huge. The stabs on the Hornet are huge. Yeah, and then you catch up with them, and then you go back to 12 degrees and so.
Wow.
So, just so I don't forget, because we've got to get to the F-15 story. So Disco was talking about how they called the Tomcats turkeys, and I think Disco probably knows it, but we used to call the F-15 the tennis court, because it was so big. And to get a tracking guns kill, you have to have your pipper on the aircraft, so anywhere on the aircraft for 1 second. And that doesn't sound like much, but there's 6,000 rounds per minute coming out of the Vulcan cannon, so you're basically putting out 100 rounds into that target. So when we would call it a tracking guns kill, it'd be like, guns track on the tennis court, because it was so easy to get the pipper out. You had this huge target that filled up your whole windscreen. And you could see him for miles, and he knew it. As soon as he go plan for him in the F-15, you could see him for probably 10 miles. So that's my F-15 story.
Thank you. I did actually. I've just recorded another episode with him, because I'm recording as many episodes as I can at the moment just to store them all up. But I recorded another episode with him. I asked him about the fake canopies written on the bottom, or painted on the bottom of Hornets, and he was, as usual. But then the thing that wasn't on the Eagle, he was dismissive of it. What's your take on those fake canopies? Do they create a?
No, use? It's a waste of time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It might fool you for a quarter second, but that's what it is. Okay. I noticed that he talked about fighting the teenage fighters, but he didn't talk much about fighting the F-18.
No, that's what I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you if you had any, general recollections or specific recollections about flying the Eagle. Was it because you did talk in episode 1, I think, about flying the F-16. I remember you talking a little bit about thrust to weight ratios and that kind of thing. But was there any particular thing that you liked to do against the Eagle at the merge or after the merge, or was it much the same as fighting an F-16? Or
because it had a better thrust to weight ratio than we did. So we would call, we would either do a rate fight, which means you're marching around the circle at a high energy state and you're just nibbling away at angles. And the F-15 and the F-16, we couldn't beat them in a rate fight. So we had to use our nose position and try and threaten them to the point that they went below their corner speed. So he talked about 385 knots. Ours was about 325. So when you're at a lower speed, your radius is lower. as long as you can keep the rate. And the rate allows you to move the nose around the circle. So we would have to threaten, if we got into a close fight with another F-15 or 16, we would have to threaten them, force them into a lower energy state than their maximum L over D max turn rate. And that was really the only way to beat them. If you're doing 350 knots, they were going to eventually march around the circle and get you. But fascinating story. When I was on the training squad, and we did a 4v4 with F-15s up in Alaska, in Elmendorf, Alaska, and these guys were, they were the dedicated air defense guys. They were going to, defend Alaska from the Soviets coming from the, from the eastern part of Russia. They had the conformal fuel tanks on them. I think they were C models at the time, and I think they might have had wing tanks as well. So they were very heavy. So they didn't want to do visual maneuvering with us. And at the time, they had the AIM-7 Mike, which is the same missile that we had. So they didn't have the AMRAAM. So we were matched in terms of missiles. We had the advantage in terms of maneuverability. But what they briefed, because they were running the show, so they said, okay, we're going to do a 4v4. It'll be BVR rules. So, anything out there on the screen that's not one of your guys is hostile and you can shoot it. So we came up with a tactic, which was fairly obvious. I don't know why they didn't figure it out, actually, because we had the same missiles. So we got up high and fast. We couldn't really sort their formation because the F-18 radar was not as good as the F-15. So we would just, shoot one missile each at something out there, and we would call kill on, if they timed out, we would call kill on that plot, and they would have to remove one of their guys. And then we would go back and reset, and then we would do the same thing. And they had tighter criteria for when they would shoot. So we were shooting, and then we would go what's called an F-pole maneuver. So you would take the radar to the very edge of the screen and illuminate the target for the missile fly out. But now you're way outside of their WES, so they can't shoot at us because we're not coming straight at them. So we would always time out before they did. And our kill ratio was incredible. I don't think they got one kill against the Hornets after about 3 engagements. And we probably killed 4 F-15s.
Really?
So that was our morning mission. We came down, we had a quick debrief with them, and it was all very professional. They weren't hanging their heads or anything. But and then we went out and we flew another mission in the afternoon, and we virtually did the same thing in the afternoon too. So we got back from the afternoon mission, and we had a quick debrief with them. Different crew, and we walked past, and the morning mission guys are still debriefing the morning trip. There was a lot of serious navel gazing going on. They're going, how the heck did this happen? A bunch of Canadians and their little Hornets, Yeah. So I can't remember the name of the wing commander. He might have ended up as the chief of staff of the Air Force. And we're in the squadron bar later on having a couple of drinks, and the wing commander comes up, and I think he was a brigadier general. So he introduces himself, and he didn't say anything about the morning mission, but I knew that he knew. He goes, "Oh yeah, how are you guys doing?" Like, "Oh, great, sir. Yeah, thanks very much for having us up here. Appreciate the hospitality and all that." He goes, "Yeah." He says, I got a lot of gun film of Hornets from my time when I was over in Germany. And we went, "Oh, really?" But he had to get that in. He had to get that dig in. Yeah. But the Hornet squadrons in Germany, they were supposed to be full multi-role, but they probably trained 80% of their time doing ground attack. So they didn't do that much air combat. And they were not, we knew that they were not as good as the Canada-based squadrons in terms of air combat.
Can you expand a little on the inability to sort the eagles for those shots then? So Disco said in one of the episodes that, and I have to try and remember to get this right, I think he said that you guys had about 25% less detection range than their APG-63. Yeah. So are you talking about detection range, or are you talking about resolution cell, the ability to break out?
Yeah. So the F-15 is a big radar cross section. So we would pick them up at good range. I mean, it was way outside our missile employment zone. So we could see them, but we just couldn't break them out and sort them. So, you might be able to see 2 targets that are very, very close together on the radar scope. So you can tell that they're flying in line abreast. There's two of them there, but when you try and lock up the one that you would do a side to side sort. So the guy on the right would take the right target. And when you try and lock them up, a lot of times it would start to lock and then it would swing over to the other guy.
Oh, right.
So it had some big limitations, and both the Tornado and the Eagle were much better. So they had a bigger radar antenna, which meant a smaller beam width, and it was able to focus on the target much better than the Hornet did. And then the Hornet ended up getting, I think it's the APG-73, which is a electronically scanned, much better radar.
Do you know, because you said I think you got out in 2000, is that when you got out? Okay.
Yes.
Do you know whether or not you got the full up version of that APG-73? I don't know if that's...
Well, we certainly used to. In the past, yeah, we would not get the export versions. A lot of countries didn't get the 7 Mike missile.
Yeah.
They didn't get the NCTR. So as far as I know, and speaking with the guys who came back from exchanges with the Navy, we got the full up versions of everything. Now, Canada has recently had a very bad reputation for security leaks and infringements and stuff. So it's quite possible that we won't get the full up version of the F-35. I really don't know. And they probably won't tell us. There'll be secret code in the computers that we just won't know that we're missing.
Yeah.
That's a great thing about the exchanges, because you see what the Americans are flying and the capabilities.
Did you have Nectar from the start in the Hornet?
Yeah.
Did you? Did the F3 have Nectar?
No. And it was a bit tricky. It didn't work anywhere near 100% of the time.
Yeah.
So there were parameters that you had to use to try and coax it into working.
Yeah. So there's sort of a look angle, isn't there? You need to be able to look down the intakes, and if you're looking down into clutter, I think it takes longer to work, doesn't it? So
yeah, there were a lot of things, and it worked on jet engine modulation. So it was the reflected energy from the fan at the front that it used to discern it. But you would also get a lot of interference off that too. So it was really fighting itself to work. So I'd just like to finish off. A lot of your guests talk about, and most of them are very experienced pilots, and they talk about what got them to that stage. And I think really the big thing for me was doing the fighter weapons instructor course on the F5. And I was very inexperienced. I'd only been a fighter pilot for 2 years at that point, which is too early to do the FWIC, because we used to call it the PhD of fighter flying. So when you finish that, you have the global view of how to employ fighters in combat. And you should be a mass attack lead, large force employment, and really know how to employ the aircraft. I'd had none of that experience. The F5 was very straightforward because it had no systems in it. So we were, a day VFR, visual bombing, all that kind of stuff. They made it difficult so that we would really get into the books. So we had to figure out launch envelopes to do toss bombing with the F5 without any electronics whatsoever. So we would run in on a map. We would have a release point, a pull-up point. You would get to a pull-up angle at a certain speed, at a certain altitude, and then you would press the pickle button, and we would launch these bombs off into the middle of this lake. And it was surprising. Like, you could get them within 500 or 600 feet, which is pretty amazing considering there was no assistance electronically whatsoever. So these are the kind of things we did to make it more difficult. But we also did a lot of large force employment exercises and that kind of stuff. And it was a huge learning curve for somebody who didn't have any experience. And through dogged determination and a lot of good luck, I ended up being the top gun on the course. So I was the top graduate on the course. And now there was a lot expected of me when I got back to the squadron, and then went on to the F-18. But that was the sort of moment when I realized that there was a lot more to this job than just being the best fighter pilot out there. And a lot of the top FWIC graduates were not the best pilots on the squadron. But the trick is to, first of all, the I in FWIC stands for instructor. So you have to be able to teach the newer pilots the craft of being a fighter pilot. but it's also knowing how to exploit the enemy's weaknesses and your strengths. So the whole, what I call the art of war. And that really came to a head when I dropped bombs. So not the first time in combat over Bosnia, but in Kosovo, where we're going in and dropping bombs. And that's where you have to be able to sit back and not get laser focused on your task. You have to see what's going on around you and think, this is how we need to survive here, or maybe we don't want to go to the target today. And there's a lot of pressure on, like when you get off on your tasking and you're going off to the target and you say, no, we're not going, they're going to be asking a lot of questions as to why did we go. So that's the kind of bigger picture that sort of led me to the point. And the other issue we talked about was, things like the jammers and the FWIC radios, and guys would just accept that. They just go, well, that's the hand that's been dealt to me. But you have to have a lot of courage to go back up to the headquarters and say, this is unacceptable. We will not do this again. So things are changing, but it's tough. And the F-35 is going to be delivered as a package. So, there's no customizing what you're going to take or what you're going to leave out. It's going to come as a standard off-the-shelf fighter. Which is a good thing.
Can't come soon enough, really, can it?
No. And we were actually fortunate because, and I'm hoping that we're fortunate because the early models of the F-35 had some significant issues with them. So they were able to fly them, but from talking to Billy Flynn, who was, deeply, deeply involved in the F-35 program, he said it's actually going to work out well for Canada because we're going to get the later model blocks.
Yeah, those early A models that the Air Force is flying were, didn't do very much at all. I think they could shoot the gun and that was about it. No real sort of war fighting capability for those early versions. So
one of the things was, I don't think this is classified. They at high speed when they got well over the Mach, it would actually damage the radar absorbent materials. So and that stuff is very hard to fix. So then they get relegated to the sort of B scale of the airplanes. They can't go out on the first day of the war. They have to wait until the SAM systems have been suppressed. So now they're into the fourth generation F-15, F-16 package. They're no longer in the ultra secret stealth package.
Well, Bones, I am out of time, I'm afraid. I wanted to say thank you so much for over the course of the last 6 or so hours, I think, of us chatting, for sharing your experiences. Genuinely, I knew almost nothing about Royal Canadian Air Force. I don't know much about Royal Canadian Air Force, but I certainly didn't know much about Royal Canadian Air Force F5 or F-18 operations. And you have, I think, very articulately and interestingly shone a light into that sort of dark spot of my aviation knowledge. And I'm sure it's the same for a lot of people listening. So thank you for doing that. And thank you for taking the time to consider also some of the stories that you wanted to tell ahead of time, and for making an effort the way you were dressed as well. That's been unique. None of my guests have done that, so I've appreciated that.
Oh, well, there you go. Looks are important, and I have to work very hard these days to improve my looks.
Well, you have a very distinguished face, a very distinguished look about you. So it was a magnificent beard, and if you were to shave the beard off, you'd have an amazing moustache as well, which is something that I expect.
I've had a moustache since I was 18. So,
well, look, there's we have omitted the back end of your career. We've not talked about your time flying for Top Aces, so maybe there's an opportunity for us next year to get back together again, talk about what happened at the end of your career with the Royal Canadian Air Force, and then the time you spent flying the Alpha Jet with Top Aces in the was it AD-Air role or the contract aggressor type role that you were involved with?
Yeah, we did both adversary and support. So we did close air support with the Arnold close air support training, and then we did adversary for the Navy and the Air Force.
Well, it would be interesting if you're agreeable to get back and do effectively a Part 4 at some point early next year.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there's some good stories there too, and the interim, while I was at Air Canada waiting to go to Top Aces. So the sort of retransition back to the military environment.
Well, let's do that. But for the moment then, so Bones, thanks once again, and we look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, Steve.